So tell us about the atmosphere once the crowd got growing.
There was a bus that arrived from Cheyenne River. The people that disembarked from the bus had been traveling for 30 hours to get there, so they were happy to see us. I think they were a little disappointed that there weren't as many people there as they had expected, but soon after, people just started flowing in, and the crowd got bigger and bigger, and I think they were happy with the turnout. It was enthusiastic. People were hopeful, I think, optimistic. But I could hear people now and then say, gee, I thought there would be more people. But I thought it was a pretty good crowd.
Yeah, I thought it was excellent. There was people were excited to see the solidarity across Indian country, because there were people from Eastern nations, Western nations, Southern nations there. So it was a very diverse representation, and I think it was hopeful, and people really took heart in the fact that this is an issue that seems to be unifying across Indian country.
So what were some of the speakers and what were their messages?
There were prayers that started off the gatherings, spiritual invocations, the message of natural resources being paramount. The water is life slogan was hit quite often and driven home, and I think it's important. The fact that these resources transcend profit, they're all important, and the peace of the movement, I think, was also emphasized, that it is a peaceful movement, and that prayer is used as a backdrop for a peaceful resolution thus far, and hope for a reconciliation of this issue. So
there was one woman, I didn't catch her name, but she was a Lakota woman who had come to DC, and she said most of her life the river was discolored and didn't taste good, but it was what they were forced to drink, and it was actually the motivation for her to go to college, get her bachelor's in chemistry, and then she went on to get a PhD in toxicology and
environmental science. Right?
Environmental science, yep. And so she talked, with earnest about the importance of keeping the water clean. She was very stirring to hear her speak. And I'm sure there were ongoing speakers. We managed to get into an overflow courtroom, so we weren't in the actual courtroom where the hearing was taking place, but was in the courtroom next door and got to listen to the audio as it was going on. And the overflow courtroom was packed. Quite a lot of people that came in to listen to the proceedings as well.
And how long did that take?
I think we were in there an hour
and a half.
So what would you say was the mood after the hearing?
People walked away with a feeling that there was some vindication of sorts. There was some chanting of, we won. The way I interpreted it was more of a reprieve. There was more like a temporary restraining order or a stay of 2 weeks that the judge issued at the end of the hearing, where he was going to schedule some consultation hearings in the next at the end of the 2 weeks to review the record and then render a decision. But there'll be no work that'll be done in between now and then, and I think people were happy with that effect, because based on whatever decision was going to be rendered today, there would have been action or correlating action in the Dakotas based on that.
Yeah, there was concern that they had heard rumors that camp out in Standing Rock was going to be surrounded, and that should they lose in court, that there would be something negative occurring out there, and they would, probably shut down the camp. So that was the concern talking about here. So the 2-week reprieve was well received. And I think the core issue was the difference of opinion on whether consultation took place, whether consultation was offered. Apparently consultation was offered, but it was refused. But they didn't go into the details of what the reasoning was for Standing Rock not participating. If in fact they didn't participate, they didn't get into detail on what that meant. So that left me a little bit confused.
Briefs are going to really go into detail on it, but both parties were only given specific amount of time for oral argument. They made reference to their briefs. They made reference to certain examples in their briefs, but in this 2-week period, the judge is going to go back and actually look into the briefs and do further investigation into the record to bear their arguments out.
And I thought it was really interesting that outside the speakers were delivering messages about the water and the importance of water and the crisis these days centered around too much water or lack of water or contaminated water and so on. But inside the courtroom, because the temporary restraining order was based on, what's that term you said it is?
An immediate and imminent harm or threat of the harm.
Right. So that was the arguments inside of the courtroom, and there was no mention of the potential contamination of the river or the lake. Right. But that's because
it was
the argument. Yeah, the argument was about
the remedy,
preventing imminent harm.
Yeah, the remedy that was being sought after necessitated like an immediate threat of harm. So what they were focusing on was the threat of harm to archaeological sites. Mm-hmm. And we were sitting there and we were wondering, why wouldn't they be focusing on the environmental harm or the possibility of a rupture in a tank or a pipe? The reason why that was so is that the remedy that they were asking for required an immediate harm, and a pipe rupture would be too remote in time and wouldn't qualify under that remedy. I'm sure it'll come up later on, but for this particular action, they really focused on archaeological sites and disrupting those and destroying those within the laying of the pipeline.
And I have to say, one of the things that I took away from it was that if you're going to protest something or disagree with something, it always needs to be in the record. And for the record, it's not helpful to just boycott something or choose not to participate out of principle without writing it, documenting it, and putting it on the record. That I think is going to be a real crucial point when the judge considers what he's going to do about this.
There's been a 3-year administrative record that's been compiled on this. At least 3 years they went back. During that time, they consulted with other tribes, and this is part of the record that defendants pointed to. I think it's going to be something that the Standing Rock Sioux are going to have to overcome. They have legitimate reasons, I feel, for not participating with regards to informed consent and genuine consultation. But I think that it's going to be something that the court is going to have to take a very hard look at. I think it was sympathetic to the cause. He was definitely aware that there were a lot of people that traveled a long way across Indian country to be at this hearing, and he knew the ramifications of the rendering. He seemed very sympathetic to the cause and didn't. And I think that was one of the reasons why he didn't render an immediate decision and actually is taking his time to deliberate on it.
Do you get a sense that the people will continue with the camp in the next 2 weeks?
Yes. I think they're definitely going to keep on. And the people that I talked to in the crowd were very committed to it. And it wasn't just Native people. They had a lot of non-Native supporters there as well. And everybody's very concerned about water and dependence on fossil fuels and extraction energy sources. And so I think it's all going to continue, and I think I just hope that something's done in the meantime constructive, because it is just a 2-week stay. Yeah. And we tend to get lulled into inaction, and then in 2 weeks it could be another crisis. I'm concerned. I mean, I'm hopeful, but I'm concerned.
So if this was our community it was happening to, what would you want to see happen in that 2 weeks' time?
I would be going back through the record. I would be reliving history and trying to beef up the arguments even on the historic sites. There was some, questions thrown at their lawyer, about, well, what constitutes a historic site and ancestral land, and where exactly is that ancestral land? Is it 2 feet under the surface, or is it the top, 2-inch layer on top of the ground? Is that the ancestral land? Like, exactly where is that? The arguments back, I thought, were not strong, so I would get everybody versed in what that is, and the media has to be really strong in conveying those messages.
I think what I would do is I'd go back to the record. I would go back to the tribes that the Army Corps of Engineers and the company said they consulted with, and I would interview them and get their takes on whether or not they felt that they had been treated fairly in the process, what their experience was in the process, get as much documentation of their actions in the process, document it as well as they can, and get their feelings on whether or not they felt that they had a genuine input into that process. I think it's instructive in how the other tribes were dealt with in there, and as it relates to how they felt that they would have been dealt with.
Mm-hmm. And I think, we're trapped, and I can understand why a particular community or tribe or nation would say, well, we're not going to participate in that because now we're buying into their process and we're just going to get sucked into it, and so we're not going to have anything to do with it. But I think that's not always the best way to go. But on the other hand, there's merit to that. And they talk about meaningful consultation. Well, what does that mean? That should mean that you have the ability to say no at the end of the discussion.
Right.
And then they talk about free, prior, informed consent, which kind of leads you to think that in the end you're going to consent. It's just that you're going to have more information about why you're consenting. Like, it's already a foregone conclusion. And so I understand that, and I think that we've done it ourselves in the past, is just say, well, we're not going to participate. Just like when we say we're not going to vote. Well, but then we're not players in the game then if we don't vote. But that doesn't, there's concessions to voting as well, which, many of us don't want to make those concessions. So we're, it's a very, we're trapped a lot of times. And I think they're in that situation, but I think they need to make clear why it is that they didn't want to participate. If that's the facts, that we don't know that, but it raised a lot of questions.
So I wanted to ask both of you, being experienced in activism and community movements, I wanted to ask you, just to end with your own perspective on how you feel this movement is growing and if it has a future.
Well, I think that it's definitely growing. Due to social media, I think that it's on everybody's radar. There's more and more people that seem to be flocking to the actual spirit camp, is what they're calling it, the actual camp out in the Dakotas. The critical mass around environmental issues is a core element to nations across the board. So I think that, this is a movement that can have some continuity, but I think we need to focus on some specific aims beyond this. But it's hard to do so when something like this is going on because of the immediacy of what's happening. I think that it's a peaceful protest. It seems to be across all Indian country. You have the forces seem to be firing on all cylinders. We're hitting the core actions. There's political pressure that's being leveraged, and there's also the actual peaceful protests, physical protests that are going on. So I think that it's a good manifestation of solidarity across the board thus far. And because of the environmental bent and environmental concerns that form the foundation of it, I think that it does have some potential to carry across the board in other issues, because it affects everybody. And that's one of the things I think that is going to really strikes home. It's not just Indian country that's being affected. It's non-natives. It's the country at large. We're helping to focus this, and I think that it's helpful. We have other people behind us that are in support of this. It's not just us in isolation. So it's a good thing.
I think anytime there's activism, anytime that there's an issue that we're against or that we're trying to protect ourselves from, that finding the solution and the alternative to it is really important and often rises out of these types of situations, like when we didn't have an ambulance service, and so we created an ambulance service, and we chose not to send our kids to public schools for certain reasons, and we built a school. So if we're going to be protesting extraction methodologies, then we need to be creating those alternatives and thinking about how we're going to push that forward because we can't just say no. We have to have an alternative. So working harder on renewable energy sources, I think, is part of this fight.
Well, I really appreciate this, and thank you for being out there. It was really awesome seeing all your pictures and getting a sense of what is going on, and everyone just has their eyes glued to Facebook. Okay, Anna. Bye. Yo honey, yo honey, yo honey.